And we are live. Welcome to Wilfred's Stories, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, kind people of Reddit. It's hard for me not to feel scared and open as I sit down to write this. Sharing my personal story with people I don't know is scary, but I know deep down that I need to do it. My shoulders have been heavy with this weight for too long. It's time for me to let it go. Now I'm going to tell you my story about how my marriage to a football player fell apart because of my greed. I, a female 28, was married to my husband, male 30, for 2 years. My husband was a rising football player, and I was a housewife. We have no children. So, let me tell you from the beginning. I grew up in a small town in a middle-class family. Actually, it was lower middle class. My father used to drive a school bus while my mother was a stay-at-home mom. I had seen the struggles my parents went through to provide for us. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful for everything they did, but I wanted more. Because of how simple our living situation was, there wasn't much room for extras or niceties. My brothers and I shared a bedroom when we were kids. Our beds were so close to each other that we could feel each other's breath while we slept. The floors creaked and the walls were peeling. No matter how much my mom cleaned, the smell of dampness stayed. Financial limitations ruled our lives, forcing us to make do with what little we had. Hand-me-down clothes, patched-up shoes, and simple meals became the norm. I too wanted the designer bags my friends owned, or the international trips their parents took them to, whereas my parents could only provide us with the basic necessities. I used to dream of things which seemed like they were out of my reach. I wanted to be able to travel the world, wear designer clothes, and live in a big house. As I got older, I got more determined to have that life for me. I came to the city looking for a job a few years back where I met my ex-husband. I was working in a bar, and my roommate was invited to some fancy party. She asked me if I wanted to join her. I had never attended a party like this. I decided maybe this party could bring me some opportunities. I remember that party distinctively. It was on a weekend night, and I was happy about it because it meant that I didn't have to take a day off from my work. We made our way to the party. I had borrowed my dress from my friend because I didn't own anything fancy for a party like this with me. Me and my friend were standing near the bar when we spotted a young guy surrounded by a group of girls. He was the highlight of that party. My friend then told me that he is a rising football player in the city and comes from a wealthy family. I kept looking in his direction, thinking how lucky he was to have that kind of life. When my friend saw me staring at him, she told me I should go and introduce myself. It was part of networking and all. I thought that something worse could already happen to me. I made my way to him and introduced myself. Usually famous people were snobby, but he wasn't. He was genuine and kind. I liked talking to him. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After some time, I excused myself, but we exchanged numbers. I didn't really expect anything except that maybe he would refer to me as someone who needed an employee. He surprised me when he texted me a few days later. He asked me how I was doing and if I would like to meet him for a drink. I couldn't stop smiling at his text and then replied, yes. We met in a very fancy restaurant. I would have felt totally out of place, but he made me comfortable and made sure that I had a good night. That's how we started dating. Dating him completely changed my life. I felt like I was living in some Disney movie or shit. He would give me such expensive gifts. I started owning brands I didn't even know existed. My friends started getting jealous of me. I loved it. It was the first time someone was jealous of me. It wasn't like he was completely flawless. He had his flaws. Sometimes he would disappear for days and then come back like nothing had happened. I asked him 2 or 3 times, but when it seemed like he was getting angry over it, I used to drop it. I didn't want to upset him. He was my ticket to the dreams I had always dreamt since I was a child. He could give me all the luxuries and vacations I wanted, and that too, without working for it. I just had to keep him happy. I did everything possible to keep him happy. I used to cook him meals, everything and anything he asked for. I made sure I did it. After a while of dating, we went on a vacation. I didn't have to pay a penny for it. It was on this trip that my now ex-husband asked me to marry him. I was over the moon. Everything he owned would have belonged to me legally after we got married. I did like him, but I wasn't going to marry someone just because of that and then suffer my whole life. I needed assurance that I was going to have a good life. I wanted an affluent life. I didn't want my children to suffer the way I did. Looking back now, I realize that my infatuation with him was more about the lifestyle he could provide me with than actual love. I ignored the warning signs and focused on the fantasy in front of me. We started the wedding preparations, and my fiancé insisted on paying for everything. I was happy because I didn't have the money anyway. He told me to go all out. He said he wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams. Everything went really well. We got married in a lavish wedding. My life was nothing less than a fairy tale. I was living my dream. Little did I know, it was just the beginning of a tumultuous roller coaster ride. The first year of my marriage was nothing less than a scene out of a romance movie. My ex-husband used to pamper me so much. Everything I wanted, I got. One time I was scrolling on my phone and came across a designer dress which wasn't out in the stores yet. I showed the dress to him and asked him, "Isn't it pretty?" He asked me if I wanted it. I shrugged and said, "Why not?" 2 days later, the dress was delivered to me with a note from the designer itself. I literally felt like a queen. I felt like God was compensating for all the years of my childhood when I couldn't get anything. My husband was giving me everything there was. In our friends group, my wedding ring had the biggest rock. All the ladies would look at me with envy, and I cherished every second of it. My husband still used to disappear sometimes. He used to come home so late that it was almost morning. But I wasn't very worried about it. I just thought he must be partying with his friends or something. That sort of thing was common with players. I used to stay at home decorating my bungalow or go shopping with his credit card. I had ways to keep myself busy. I had more than most people did, and I enjoyed every bit of it. I had asked my husband to take me on a vacation. He agreed and told me we could go anywhere I wanted. I spent a week researching the perfect holiday destination for us and finally decided on Greece. I always wanted to go there since I was a child, but never had the money to go. The opportunity to go there was finally here. We decided on a 7-day holiday. I had booked the 5-star resorts and everything in Santorini. The trip was fantastic. We did wine tours. We did traditional sightseeing. Just when I didn't think I could be happier, my then husband surprised me with a cruise trip. I was really on top of the world, not knowing that I was going to hit the rock bottom real soon. The trip is my last happy trip with my husband. It was the last trip, in fact. Everything changed after that trip. We came back from the trip, and after a few weeks, my husband's behavior started to change. I didn't know what was wrong with him. I asked him what was going on, and he said he was worried for the next season. It made sense to me, so I let it go. He started coming home late more frequently than before. He was always out and never at home. We stopped spending time together. He also stopped giving me gifts. I felt really bad when that happened. Before the trip, he made sure to get me something once a week. But 2 months had passed, and he didn't mention anything. One day when I was in the kitchen cooking us lunch, he came and kissed me. I was surprised because we had stopped being affectionate with each other. He waited for a few moments and then asked me if he could borrow his credit card, as he had lost his and the new card was coming after someday. I loved that credit card. I could shop as much as I wanted with it, but I still nodded and then went to him and gave him his card. He kissed me on the cheeks again and then left the house. That was the first time he had asked for it, and I felt so upset that I didn't have the card with me anymore. Days passed like this, and every day I kept hoping that I would get my card back, but there were no signs that he was going to return it. I didn't want to ask for it because that would have seemed like I was only concerned about the money. My husband was never at home at that time. He would always tell me that something or the other came up and that he had to stay out. I started doubting that something was wrong. There were too many things to ignore at this point. My husband was always drunk. He would stay out for hours, and he didn't even talk to me. Plus, he had taken away my credit card. There were too many signs. I decided to find out the reason behind my husband's strange behavior. I called up one of our mutual friends and asked him if he knew why my husband was acting differently. He shrugged and told me he didn't know either. My husband hasn't hung out with him for quite long. I thanked him and ended the call. I was trying to figure out what could tell me the reason behind my husband's behavior. I thought of everything I could do. I even thought of hiring a private detective behind him to know the truth. I didn't want to spend money like that. I thought of other ways. One day when my husband was sleeping, I took his phone silently and took it to the washroom. He hadn't changed his password, thankfully. I checked his Instagram to see if he's in someone's DM, but found nothing. I also looked for any apps like Tinder and all, but again, nada. I was getting tired. I was sure his mind was somewhere else. I just had to find out where it was. I didn't have to wait a lot to know the truth. I found it out when I was least expecting it, and it was my nightmare. One day when I was bored at home, I thought of doing some online shopping. My laptop was discharged, so I took my husband's laptop, which was lying on the table in the living room. I opened the laptop and started browsing at Zara. I didn't find anything I liked, so I closed it. I was just about to shut off the laptop when I thought of clearing the history. My husband didn't like it when I used his laptop or phone. I opened the history and saw that my husband had last opened his internet banking website. Curiosity got the control of me, and I opened the website. His account was already logged in, thankfully. What I saw next shocked the fuck out of me. My husband's bank balance was in the negative. I froze at the spot, not understanding what was happening. How was this even possible, I thought. I thought there must be some mistake or some technical glitch. I refused to believe that this was the truth. I opened his account statement and checked where all his money went. Another shock came through me when I saw that large chunks of money were transferred to casinos. There were other random names that I wasn't aware of. Why would he give money to people in casinos, and that too in millions? It was a huge amount, even for him. I needed an explanation from him. Was he lending these people money? So many questions clouded my brain at that moment of time. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. I kept calling him, but got no response. My anger increased as time passed by. Finally, the night came and my husband came back home. I didn't wait any second longer then. I immediately asked where all the money went. He looked confused for a minute, but then his eyes fell on the laptop in the couch, and understanding was drawn on him. He knew how I knew. He got angry and told me that he had told me to stay away from his things and that I should stay within my limit. That angered me even more. I went up to him and told him to cut the bullshit and tell me honestly where all the money was. Till that point, I still had hope that he would give me some logical explanation about whether we actually still have the money. I was waiting for him to tell me that. I didn't expect to hear what he told me. He told me that all our money was gone. He was on the verge of going bankrupt. I asked myself how it all happened. He then collapsed on the couch and started rubbing his eyes. He then told me everything that was happening for the last few months. He said that he was hanging out with a few of his friends at a party where someone made a bet. My husband won that bet and some money with it. He started going to casinos with those men and used to bet a lot of money, thinking he would win so much money there. In the beginning, he used to win, so he kept playing. Then he started to lose. He didn't give up then. He thought if he kept playing, he would win back the money he had lost. This wasn't just a day or two. He did this for months, and now we were broke. I couldn't believe it. All my dreams about living a luxury life broke just because my husband was a stupid man and a gambler. That too, a bad one. I felt like slapping him or doing something to him to make him realize what he had done to me. I couldn't look at his face any longer, so I left the living room and went to my bedroom and locked the door. I needed space for him. He got the hint and didn't try to come closer to me. I was in my bed when I heard the sound of the engine and him driving off. I was filled with rage because of his actions. All my dreams, everything I wanted in life was gone in a moment because of him. I don't. I've been so angry in my life like I was at that moment. I didn't have money in my childhood, but that was different. I came from a middle-class family. This time, I was going broke because my husband was a stupid man. I was consumed with rage that I didn't even think anything. I just texted George, his personal trainer. George had been my husband's personal trainer for a very long time. He was his trainer from even before we started dating. When I started dating my ex-husband, he introduced me to George one day. George was good-looking. He seemed extra friendly to me, quite flirtatious. I just laughed then, but my husband had noticed it too. After George left the house that day, he told me that he didn't like him near me. I made it my mantra to stay away from him from that day onwards. I was hell-bent on doing everything that my boyfriend liked. I wanted him to consider me as his wife, and I did everything for that. Whereas my husband couldn't even take care of the money that was supposed to take us and our future children. I was done with doing what he wanted. I wanted to do something wrong, something bad to him. What could be worse than his wife sleeping with his personal trainer behind his back? I thought of George first because I knew how much it was going to hurt my husband that his wife went to George. Him and George were always in some kind of competition, and my husband loved to win. I was going to make him lose. Another reason for choosing George was that I knew it wouldn't be very difficult to convince me. He would be ready for it as soon as I asked him. I also had a hope that maybe George would save me from getting broke. Just as I expected, his reply came almost immediately. I had texted him if he could meet me. He replied telling me sure and asking me where I want to meet. I thought about it for a moment. I didn't want to meet at home because my husband could come home anytime. I thought of a hotel on the outskirts of the city. Noon we know visited there, so there were slim to zero chances that someone we knew could see me there. I texted him the location and told him to meet me there the next day. I had told him that we'll meet at the restaurant of the hotel. His text came telling me that he'll be there waiting for me. The next day, I got dressed in a dress which showed all my curves and a lot of cleavage. I needed to look hot if I wanted to achieve what I had in mind. I did subtle makeup with bold, pouty lips. I didn't even need to make any excuse to go and meet George because my husband wasn't even at home. He hadn't come home since the previous night after he told me all about gambling. I didn't care either. It was best if there was as much distance as possible at that time. I reached the restaurant on time, but I didn't go inside immediately. I waited for a few minutes. I didn't want to appear too interested in this. I had to have the upper hand with George. I wanted him to pursue me. One thing I had learned about men was that they didn't like anything they got too easily. I wasn't a fool to be one of those things. As I made my way to George, he looked up, and when he saw me, he smiled. He also checked out with an appreciating gaze. I was enjoying all of it. We settled down and started talking. It was a normal conversation. The normal, "What's up? How have you been?" We got comfortable with each other quite soon. After some time, George asked me how my husband was doing. He told me he heard somewhere that my husband made some financial decisions. I thought about how everyone knew about it except me. I looked at George. It was clear he knew about the gambling. He was just being subtle about it. I took that opportunity and played my victim card. I got emotional as I told him how it feels like everything is lost for me now. He looked at me with sympathy in his eyes. I lied to him about how it's not even the money. What hurts me the most is how I have lost my husband now. In the back of my mind, I was calculating that if the news is spread among people, that means that we are at the end of the rope only. I needed to find a way out very quickly. I smiled at George, hoping that he would be my way out. After a few drinks, we got the bill and George paid for it. I told him that I think I'm going to stay in the hotel only for the night as I don't want to go home. He nodded in understanding and then told me that he will drop me to my room. We walked to my room together after talking to the receptionist. George told me good night and to call him if I needed something. I nodded at him and muttered a thanks. He was just about to leave when I kissed his cheeks. He looked at me in confusion just for a second, and before I could say anything, he entered the room and kissed me back. We didn't stop at just kissing. We did more, and finally slept with each other. I felt odd satisfaction that night. My husband broke all my dreams, and I broke his pride. He liked to show off to George that he had me. It wasn't true now. I slept at night comfortably. I had a way to still make my dreams come true. The next morning when I woke up, George was still asleep. I got up and went to the window. I was looking at the view when George came from behind me and hugged me. He wished me good morning and kissed me. We had coffee together, and it was finally time to go back home. Before we left, George asked me directly if this was a one-time thing or if I'd like to continue this. I smiled at him and told him that I would like to see more of him. He seemed happy. I came back to an empty home. My husband still hadn't come back home. The bed was just like I had left it. I changed my clothes and switched on my laptop. I started researching George. I wanted to know if he had the means to make my dream come true or not. To my surprise, a happy one, he did have the means. He was not just a personal trainer to my husband. He was also a landlord. He owned many shops in the city which were in the prime area. He also had many investments which gave him good returns. I was really happy with what I had found. This was all I wanted. I was not going to let my husband's stupid decisions ruin things I wanted for years. I thought that I wasn't going to waste my prime years with my husband struggling again. I deserved better, and George was going to provide that for me. My affair with George continued. I didn't text him first after the night. I waited patiently for him to text me back. I waited for the whole night just looking for his texts and got really disappointed when they didn't come. My husband had come back home at that time for a short duration. We both didn't talk to each other. Neither he did try, nor did I make an attempt. He simply came, took a shower, and then left after some time. This home had become a hotel for him. I wasn't complaining, though. I thought the more we stayed away from each other, the better it was. However, he finally texted me after a week. I was over the moon. He told me he got caught up with some work and that's why he couldn't reach out to me earlier. I told him it was all cool. He then asked me if I would like to meet him again. I replied after some time, even though I had seen the texts instantly. I agreed to meet him. He texted me the location and the time we were supposed to meet. I got ready and then went to meet him. He was already waiting for me. He smiled at me like he was happy to see me there. We went to the suite he had booked for us. We spent the whole night together. In the morning, I told him that I should go home, but he insisted on staying longer. I was more than happy with listening to that. We spent the whole day with each other. My affair with George continued for around a month. Sometimes my husband would be home and I couldn't meet him. George used to get upset with that. One day he told me that I should divorce my husband. He told me that he would take care of me. He didn't like to meet me secretively. He said that I shouldn't waste my time with a loser like my husband. George also told me that the health of my husband wasn't looking very good, and it seemed like he was not going to do well in the football season that was coming up. My husband was in his late 20s at that time. He was just about to turn 30. I calculated that there wasn't much hope for him in football anyway. All the money he had made was already gone. Our home was going to get seized too if he didn't return the money to the bank. I didn't think his family was going to help him out either. I told George that I was thinking about it. He told me that he was there for me and knew good lawyers as well. I took George's help and got the divorce paper ready from the lawyer he had told me about. The papers were served to my husband. When I came back home after meeting George, I found my ex-husband on the couch. His eyes were red. He looked so angry. I saw the envelope in his hand and knew that the divorce papers had made him this angry. I didn't say anything to him and went to the kitchen. He followed me to the kitchen and asked me what the fuck was I doing. I told him I didn't know what he meant and tried to go to the bedroom. He didn't let me go. He held my wrist tightly and asked me what was wrong with me and all. When I didn't say anything to him, he got even more upset and started breaking things from the counter. I told him that I don't want to do anything with him and the mess he had made. I texted George to pick me up from my house. When George entered the house, my husband's anger intensified. He started cursing loudly and asked what George was doing here. I went to George, kissed him in front of my husband quite passionately, and told him that I had called him here. My husband got speechless after what we saw. George smirked at him. I told him to sign the papers. I still remember how heartbroken he looked. I almost felt bad for him, but the calculating side of me overpowered me, and I walked away. He signed the papers shortly. I had moved in with George. Our divorce process didn't take much time. I got another surprise after our divorce was finalized. Just after our divorce, the football season was on. I had expected that this would be my husband's last season, and that he was going to perform really bad. But to my and everyone's surprise, he performed excellently well. He made the most money in that season. I suddenly started feeling bad for what I had done with him. He made a mistake, but he also had the capacity to correct his mistakes. With the money he was making, he could easily repay the loan that was on him in a very short time. I started regretting everything that I did with him. George had a stable life, but he didn't treat me like my ex-husband did. If I asked him for a vacation, he would instead tell me that we could spend that money on buying a property. That property would give us rent, whereas vacation will be a waste of money. His money was of no use to me. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't use it. He controlled his money to every last buck. If I needed something, he used to ask me how much it cost. If something cost around $59, then he would give $59 only. He also had a habit of asking for bills. Living with George was like I was back in my childhood. Except this time, it was worse because I could see the money but not touch it. I soon realized the grave mistake I had made by leaving my husband when he needed me. I should have been there for him, but I gave him more troubles and heartache. I wanted to go back to him, but I knew he wouldn't take me back after that show. I had put up with George in the living room. I got to know that he had stopped gambling for good and was doing a lot of work to get his life on track. His family had also helped him a lot. It wasn't much of a big deal to them. They were wealthy people. When I got my divorce, my husband's financial condition was really bad, and therefore he didn't have to give me anything. But now he was getting everything back in his life. The money, and after the last season he played really well, he was getting his fame back as well. Whereas I had lost everything. I lost my husband and my home. The guy who was supposed to give me everything turned out to be useless as well. Even though I was always calculating, all my calculations resulted in me getting nothing. I finally got tired of chasing my dreams and decided it was best to just forget it. There wasn't much for me in the city. Everyone in the football community hated me. I was the woman who had left her husband in his bad times and cheated on him, that too with his personal trainer. I didn't blame them for their hatred for me. They were right only. I just couldn't bear all that anymore. I ended my relationship with George. He wasn't very upset about it. It seemed like he wanted that as well. I left the city and went back to my childhood town. Before going back, I thought of meeting my ex-husband once, just to tell him goodbye. I went to the house which used to be mine. He opened the door, and as soon as he saw me, his face turned red from anger. He was about to shut the door on my face when I told him to just listen to me once. I begged him and he stopped. I told him that I was sorry for everything I had done. He laughed at my apology. He told me that I had done him a favor by leaving him and showing him my true colors. He said if I hadn't shown him who I really was, he never would have thought that I was such an evil person. I listened to him because his anger was justified. I told him that I was leaving the city and going back to my town. He mocked me how George couldn't keep me satisfied. When I went to his house, I had a bit of hope. I had hoped that maybe he would see me and forgive me, but he was still angry with me. He looked at me like he hated me. I started crying, hoping that maybe that will soften him up a bit. He just told me with plain hatred how it was good that I was leaving the city because he never wanted to see my face again. I told him goodbye and left his house in tears. All the hope I had inside of me was finally dead. I took the bus and went to my town. The aftermath of what I had done followed me even back there. Everyone in the town somehow knew what I did in the city, and everywhere I went, I was given judgy looks. I finally made peace with the fact that what's done was done. I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wished for it. I started living in a small apartment because even my parents felt ashamed to be seen with me. The apartment was the size of the walk-in closet I had in my big house. I started taking local jobs. Whoever needed an assistant, I was up for it. It took me time to get used to it. I finally started working as a hairdresser, and that job stuck with me. It has been almost a year since I moved into my town. I feel guilty for a lot of things I have done. But the one action that I regret every day is what I did with my ex-husband. He didn't deserve that. The way I ruthlessly cheated on him was really low. If I could go back in time, I would never go to that hotel or text George. Like I said in the beginning, it is hard for me to share the worst part of me with strangers on the internet. But I felt like I needed to share this with someone. I don't have any friends or anyone like that with whom I can openly share why I did what I did. The best bet seemed this. It definitely feels better now that everything is in the open. I just hope that the guilt and regret goes away one day as well. The burden of it feels too heavy. Update. Thank you for all the comments and likes. When I wrote this post, I didn't expect that it would be this number of people. I'm thankful to all you who read my story. Also, to the people who are calling me a gold digger and names, I won't defend myself to you. You are somewhat right. I have always kept money as my priority rather than love. I do realize that the reason why my romantic relationship didn't work out with my ex-husband or with George was that I prioritized money over love. I only chose them because they had money. Anyways, Thanks again to all of you for listening to my story and sharing your opinions.